And he teaches them how to stop yelling, defiance, and power struggles with most strong willed children. I'm definitely going to be taking notes today. Kirk is known for very practical strategies and scripts delivered with humor and compassion. So we'll learn how to get your kids to listen the first time while building a close and trusting relationship. Thank you for being here, Mr. Martin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining me or joining all of us for this. So here, let me start with the kids, kind of generally describe the kids we're talking about today, because I'll refer to them as our kids. These are kids, and I don't like putting labels, but in general, strong-willed kids. These are kids who may be on the spectrum, OCD tendencies, maybe PDA tendencies, all over the spectrum. You'll notice these kids as I describe them, but they tend to be very bright kids. They just tend to use their intelligence to argue with you. They're like little cops, judges, and attorneys all wrapped into one. You will find that when they wake up in the morning, they have an agenda. They know what they like. They know what they don't like. What they don't like is usually anything you want them to do. And so they always want to do it their own way. And one of the hard parts is that consequences tend not to work with these kids because they don't really fear losing things. What they fear or dread most is losing their agency, their independence, their ability to do things themselves. We often call them stove touchers. They will touch that hot stove, even though they know it's hot. You've told them 100 times it will burn their skin, and yet they're going to do it anyway. And so it's tough to raise these kids. It's tough to teach these kids, but they're amazing kids. We love these kids. We have our own very, very strong-willed son, who I'll probably reference a little bit today in this presentation. These are kids who do want to do things their own way. And you're really going to struggle at times because you're the authority figure, you're the parent. You're like, no, if you did it my way, it would be so much easier. Well, they don't really value doing things the easy way. They like doing it the harder way because that's how they learn best. And then relevant to this morning's conversation is these are very intense kids. A lot of these kids, and this isn't all of them, your kids are, every child is individual, but these are general descriptions right now. They're intense kids who often picture things in their brains. They get an idea and they say, I want to do this. But then uh, they can't always carry out what they want to do. They don't always have the tools. In many ways, we call these kids old souls. They tend to be very good in the adult world, but they struggle in the kid world. And so they try to accomplish something, it doesn't turn out right, and they get extremely upset. And so you've noticed probably with these kids, they go from like here, from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. And the common strategies that we've all been taught tend not to work with these kids. Talking doesn't work. If you try to be rational with them, oh, honey, there's no need to be upset. That will make them even more upset. And so I want to give you some very practical tools today so that for the next week or so, as you encounter these meltdowns and intense situations, or for the next years, you have some different tools, and I encourage you to experiment with different ones because not everything works with every child, but I've found these work pretty well. So I'll give you our experience very quickly. We had our strong-willed son who we say came out of the womb with boxing gloves on. He just loved to argue. He's a very intense kid. He's a grown man now. He's a young man because I'm old. And so he's older. But what we did was we used to live in Northern Virginia out in Loudoun County. And I had this idea, hey, why don't we take these really strong-willed kids, kids on the spectrum, and instead of just bringing them into a therapeutic office to work with them one-on-one, which is fine to do, but most of these kids, they just tell the therapist, I don't know, and you don't get a lot out of them. We wanted to actually bring them into our home. So we lived in a small townhome in Loudoun County, and the idea was we would have 8 to 10 to 15 kids in our home at any one time. We would have Lego camps where they would come and build with little Lego blocks. And we would change plans on them at the last minute. Why? Because your kids really struggle with changes in plans and they would get upset. And these kids struggle with social skills because they tend to be better. They have something called asynchronous development, asynchronous out of sync. So they get along better with little kids or older kids and adults or animals, but they struggle with kids their own age. And so we would put them in situations where they would struggle and get upset so that in the moment we could teach them how to calm down and how to self-regulate and control their impulses. And over the course of a decade out in Loudoun County, we had 1,500 kids in our home. So we lived where you live. We know how stressful traffic is and everything else, all the pressure you have. So let me jump into this. I know the presentation title was 5 Ways to De-Escalate. At the moment on my sheet of paper, because I went through your questions last night that people had submitted, I probably have about 10 things, and I'll fit that all in. I'm trying not to talk too fast for the sake of our wonderful interpreters, but I'll fit this all in. So let's jump into this. So I want to start with a very common situation and demonstrate some of these principles just through an example. So, excuse me. Let's say that you have a child who struggles with anxiety, because many of us do have those kids. I struggle with anxiety myself. So, these kids' anxiety is caused by unknowns, things you can't control. And many of you have kids who have, in layman's terms, they have very busy brains. They're always thinking about things. And it kind of feels like life is out of control for them. So they can try to control other people and situations. That's why it's hard to play board games with them, because they're going to cheat. And so anxiety comes from there. So I'm just going to use, sometimes I'll use examples of a son because we had a strong-willed son, but this applies to daughters, mom and daughter, mom and son, dad and daughter, dad and son, grandparents. So I'll try to do examples from different age groups, but know that the principles apply whether we're talking about a 3-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 13-year-old, or a 22-year-old. So, so you ask your son, hey, do you want to take that new Taekwondo or martial arts class this coming winter? And they say, sure, sign me up. A couple weeks later, you come home and you're like, hey, we have to get ready. Your new Taekwondo class is tonight. And they immediately resist you. And they may not even say anything, but they start resisting. And so you come in, you're like, hey, come on, got to get ready, got to go, got to go. And what you found with strong-willed kids is the more that you try to pressure and rush them, the more they tend to resist. And so then we start saying, hey, if you know what, I paid $175 for that class, you better get in the car. And then because we tend to go right to consequences and sometimes to threats and bribes even. And those things tend not to work, especially in this situation, because we're dealing with anxiety. And what ends up happening is, I'll tell you what I used to do before I learned to calm myself is I would yell at my son, you better get in that car. I paid a lot of money for this class. If you don't go to that class, you're going to lose all your screens for the next month. And I would throw out a big consequence. Well, nothing ever really worked. In the end, my son would end up saying, I'm not going. Taekwondo is stupid. You're stupid. And I want you to know, if you get those reactions, you're not doing something wrong as a parent. These are really difficult kids to raise. They're going to kill it. They're going to crush it in the adult world. They're really good in the adult world. They're just really hard to raise. So don't beat yourself up for this. So he would yell at me, I'm not going. You can't make me. Well, then as a good parent, you're going to be, hey, this child is being defiant, disrespectful. I'm the authority figure in the home. That kid needs to listen. But all that will happen is you will escalate things, and you've been there. It will turn into a 3-hour meltdown that will ruin your entire night. So part of being calm that we talk about doesn't mean that you don't feel frustrated or angry with your kids. You're going to feel that. It means you just don't react to these situations. So here's how I began to handle it differently. I'd say, I take a deep breath at times. I just stop myself and reset, and I'd ask a question. Hey, Casey, our son's name is Casey. Hey, Casey, is your stomach a little bit upset right now? And he'd kind of nod. And I'd say, oh, I know what's going on. You're anxious, you're nervous. And then there's two things I would do. Number one, normalize anxiety in this situation. See, anxiety is a very normal thing to experience. It lets you know things are out of your control. You should be a little bit on high alert. And so normalizing it says, of course I love the phrasing, of course you're nervous about going to this new place. You've never been there before. You don't know anybody. You don't know if the instructor is going to be nice to you or if the other kids are going to pick on you. Of course you're nervous. See, normalizing it is very settling, because oftentimes what we try to do is we say this, oh, honey, there's no need to be anxious or nervous. Your brother or sister did that class and they loved it. See, that's dismissing their emotions. And that's what most husbands do to wives. And wives, you don't like it when your husband says, oh, honey, there's no need to be upset. See, they're dismissing your legitimate feelings. So when I normalize it and say, oh, I totally get that. See, now what's happening is it's not only that you're just validating what they're going through, you're showing that you actually understand what they're going through and that it doesn't throw you off. It doesn't move you. You're not flustered by it. Oh, yeah, of course, going to this new class, to this new school, to this new event, your stomach should be a little bit upset. That's very normal. So that in itself will calm the situation down a little bit. The second strategy that I use is this. Wherever your kids go, ask another adult to give them a specific mission of some kind, a job to do. So if you can, I would take my child to the new class a few days ahead of time and say, hey, Mr. Taekwondo guy, instructor, my son's going to be in your class on Thursday night. He loves helping other adults, not me. I'm kidding there. Your kids won't do much for you, but they are amazing for other people. Hey, my son will help you. Could you give him a job to do? And the Taekwondo guy says, hey, Casey, I'm really psyched. I'm excited you're going to be in my class. I need your help because our kids like feeling helpful and needed. I could use your help. Could you come 5 minutes early every week and help me set up the mats and rearrange the cones and get ready for class? And most of your kids, if another adult asks them to do something, they'll do it. And so watch, when we come to that first night of Taekwondo class or whatever night it is, and I say, hey, Casey, remember, we've got Taekwondo tonight. My son would say, Mom, Dad, remember Taekwondo guy needs my help. He said be there 5 minutes early. We need to leave like 3.5 hours early so we're not late, right? That's why your kids want to be early, because it relieves the anxiety to get there a little bit early. Now, when your child enters that new class, he or she has a specific job to do. That helps relieve the anxiety. That helps relieve the meltdown that comes. So let's start going through some principles here, and I'll throw in examples for each. The first thing that happens when your child starts to get really upset, your first step is this. It's not to control them, it's to control yourself, right? Because the quickest way to change your child's behavior is to first control your own. And that's not always easy. But we've got to break those generational patterns. Some of us are very reactive. My dad was career military. So all I knew was yell and scream, fear and intimidation. So I had to break that pattern. So a few ways to control yourself, and I'll give you more as I do examples, is number one, try changing your body posture. Look, if you walk into a room with an upset child and you stand over them, that tends to produce a defensive response. If, though, you were to walk into a room and sit, whether in a chair or lie down in the middle of the floor, it changes the entire dynamic, because when you sit, you tend to talk a little slower. You don't elevate your voice as much. You talk in a calmer manner. It changes the dynamic a little bit. Tone of voice is extremely important for these kids. So I was raised with that very intense voice, yelling and screaming. You need to get to the car right now, young man. And all that did was provoke a fight or flight or freeze response in me, and that will happen in these kids. And so that yelling and screaming reactive tone actually tells kids, hey, mom or dad, you're not even in control of yourself right now. So the strong-willed kids are very smart kids, and they know, well, if I just push your buttons, which they're very good at doing, then mom or dad will lose it emotionally. Well, as soon as I lose control of myself, the child's actually in control. And it actually creates a lot of instability, because the adult who's supposed to be the leader can't even control himself or herself. So we know that that very old school authoritarian approach hasn't worked. But then as a society, we've swung a little bit too far the other side. So now we talk to our kids in this really sweet tone. And what I want you to know is, I know the intention that you have in talking in that really sweet tone is really sweet. Your intentions are good, but for a strong-willed child, they will hear it as condescending and weak. And it creates actually a lot of instability. It sounds like I don't know what to do, and so I'm going to talk to you in this tone. I don't want you to do that. It's not a good tone to use. So here's the tone that I will model throughout this presentation. Even, matter-of-fact tone. It's a very business-like tone. I will talk to an upset 2-year-old, 5-year-old, 15-year-old, 35-year-old in this tone. It is very, very grounding. What this tone says is, I've seen this before. I've done this before. I can handle this. When your world is out of control, mine's not. I've got this. So I do encourage you in everyday situations to practice this tone. Now, we're not going to talk so much about defiance today, but even in a defiant child, if you react to that child, or if you talk really sweetly and say, mommy doesn't like it when you talk like that, they won't respect you. But an even, matter-of-fact tone says, oh yeah, that kind of talk isn't going to work in my home. That's not who you are. You know that's not going to work. See, I'm just talking very honestly to them. So work on that tone of voice. And again, I will model that a lot. And then I'd encourage you with this: expect meltdowns with these kids, right? You are Northern Virginia families. You are extremely busy. You fight so much traffic. You have so many expectations on you to keep up with the neighbors. You are taking your kids to therapy, to classes, so many different things. I would encourage you, purposefully and intentionally, slow down your life if you have one of these kids. Build into your schedule time, plan for it. Hey, I know when I pick my child up from school or they come home, My strong-willed child is probably going to vent for 10 minutes about everything they don't like about school. But then we have to run to the grocery store. And now there's going to be a tantrum because they wanted a cookie from the produce department. And now they're having a big tantrum because I won't let them get whatever they want. And now we get home finally and I have to cook dinner. Well, now the siblings are going to fight because that's what siblings do. Right? And then now we have dinner, and many of your kids are very picky at the dinner table. And then your spouse may get upset and say, sit still at the dinner table. And now, especially as usually as a mom, you are managing the emotions of your children and often of your spouse, because that's what happened in our home. And you're always taking the emotional temperature of everyone, and you're being the referee between this more strong-willed or child on the spectrum and the spouse. It's really hard work and it gets overwhelming. So I'd rather you build in some space in your schedule and say, oh, I woke up this morning and here's what I know. My child will probably have some kind of emotional meltdown or anxiety or be upset today. Plan on it. And then if it doesn't happen, then you can celebrate that you made it through one day without something bad going on. But expect it. You're not a bad parent because that happens. These are just tough kids. Okay, so number one kind of thing that we went through is control yourself in that situation. Second step is this. So instead of trying to make the child calm down, instead, give them something they're in control of. Here's why. How many of you, when you're upset, like for someone to look at you and say, oh, you just need to calm down? Nobody likes to be told to calm down. It's infuriating. The reason most humans get upset is because we have a loss of control or a perceived loss of control that triggers us and we get upset. So think about this. What is it that your child actually likes to do? Something that gives them a sense of control. So I'll give you a couple examples. We were working with a family and they have a child who loves to fish. So the child was melting down, really upset. And the parents, instead of saying, hey, you need to calm down right now, said, oh, I just remembered we're going fishing on Saturday. Do you think you could go to the garage and organize your fishing lures? And the idea is a lot of your kids and a lot of kids on the spectrum, they like to organize things, to count things. If any of you have kids who will come home, especially little kids, you'll find like stones or acorns in their pockets. Well, why is that? Well, it's because the rest of my life is out of my control. No, everybody tells me what to do, but these acorns or stones, I can put them in my pocket. I can put them in my ears or in my mouths. I can line them up. And so that gives you a sense of order. Think about this. How many of you, before you go to bed at night, clean the kitchen sink? Because what you're saying inside is, the rest of my life is kind of out of my control. I can't always control my kids or my spouse, but my kitchen sink, it's spotless. And it gives you that external order, gives you a sense of internal order. So I like giving kids things to do that they're in control of. And I'll give you more on that actually in this next step. So number three, proactively observe your kids. Your kids will tell you everything they need by what they do. So I'll give you a couple examples. So we had all these kids at our house and they were all emotionally volatile kids. And so I would notice many of these kids like to tinker with things. They like to build things, to make things, to see how things work. Many of your kids have an ability to see patterns in things. And so they won't read the directions and they'll build something because they can see the pattern. It's partly why they're so good at arguing with you, because they know exactly what you're going to say before you even say it. So with those kids, I would have a job or a mission already planned for when they got upset. So they get upset and I'd say, oh, you know what I just remembered? And I like that phrase. Oh, you know what I just remembered? It was a stalling tactic for me to think of something for them to do. It gave me 3 or 4 seconds. You know what? There's a broom in my basement and it's broken. There's some duct tape down there. If you could go and find that duct tape and fix that broom for me, it would really help me out. Watch what we just did. This child is getting really upset. And instead of trying to talk too much to the child, because watch, talking too much makes kids even more upset. Because when you talk, that's very rational. When kids are upset, when we're upset as adults, we are in an irrational place. And using a lot of words actually escalates things. You can't process it all. So this child's getting really upset. Instead of trying to convince him not to be upset, instead of trying to talk too much, I said, oh, I've got a mission for you because I could really use some help. It was very specific and concrete. There's duct tape, there's a broom, it's in my basement. It gave the child some space. And if you're taking notes, which you don't have to do, I would write down the word space in really big letters because intense kids need space to process their disappointment and frustration. So it gave him space away from me, from everybody else, to go do something he or she is actually really good at doing, right? I didn't ask the child to do something frustrating in that moment. I created a win. Hey, could you do me a favor? Go and watch the tone. I didn't say, hey, buddy, I can tell you're really upset, because I don't like people talking to me in that tone. It sounds condescending. I also didn't say, you know what, if you don't calm down right now, you're not going to get to go outside and play, or you lose your Legos. I didn't say either of those things. I controlled myself. I'm the grown adult. I gave him a mission, something he's in control of, because now he gets to go downstairs. And the physical tactile process of tearing that duct tape, of fixing that broom, is very settling and calm, because I can't always control my emotions, but I can fix things and I can build with Legos and I can make something. So that was a way of observing. I'll give you another example. So I noticed a lot of the kids who came into our home, um, they would do this weird thing where they would take the cushions off of our sofa. They would lie down on the hard part of the shell of the sofa. And my first instinct was, you guys are weird. Why are you doing this? And that's a normal reaction, but don't stop there. Always look beneath the surface. Many of you have kids who have sensory processing issues. And so they're very tactile kids. And so lying down on the hard part of the sofa, um, it made their bodies actually feel settled. And so I can use that insight. A lot of your kids, they will come home from school, they like to be in confined spaces. So here are 3 examples. One of them will be for de-escalating, but these are just kind of bonus tips. They like that being underneath things. So sleeping. Sometimes for kids who struggle with sleeping, I put them in a sleeping bag. And with our son, when he was little, we would actually put him in a sleeping bag and let him sleep in his closet. Now, I know that sounds weird, but weird things work with some of your kids. Why? Because he felt very comfortable and safe and wrapped up in that sleeping bag. Doing homework sometimes, instead of standing over your child while they're doing homework at the kitchen table, I put a blanket over the kitchen table. I have now created a fort. Forts are fun and cool for kids. So now they can do their homework underneath the kitchen table. You could give them a flashlight for light. Why? It stimulates the brain. It's interesting. It's a different way to do it. So here's how we use this in our home when kids were getting upset. I would have a one word or two word or phrase, a code word or code phrase. We already said using lots of words tends to get jumbled in the brain, tends to make kids more upset. So a child would be getting really upset in our home, and I would say, oh, sofa. And their mission when I said sofa was to go into the living room, throw the cushions off the sofa. I knew they weren't going to place them down nicely. I'm a realist. They're going to throw them off the sofa. Then they were to sit or lie down on the sofa. I would then go into the room. I'd put the cushions on top of them, and then I would actually sit on top of the cushions with appropriate weight, right? Use your wisdom. I didn't crush children, obviously. But here's what would happen. It was instantly calming for three reasons. Number one, it was weird. It was different. It threw them off a little bit. Number two, sensory pressure. It felt very settling to get that pressure on them. And then the third thing is there was no eye contact. Now, I know a lot of people will teach when kids are really upset, get down and look them in the eyes. For some kids, that will escalate the shame cycle, because what happens is your kids get very, very upset, usually over small things, over little things going wrong, over things that seem trivial, and they overreact. Well, they know they do that. They know in the middle of the moment when they're just melting down and out of control, you know what they feel? They feel embarrassed and they feel ashamed. And then that's when we often get down and look them in the eyes right when all that shame is going through them. See, no one likes to be watched when they're struggling with their emotions. Nobody wants to be watched. So giving them, I'm going through a lot of different things here. I'm sorry, I apologize for that, but giving space and no eye contact is a really good strategy for these kids. And that's why that worked. Let me do this example. Let's say a mom and daughter are in are out in the countryside of Virginia at a horse farm, because many of your kids being around horses and animals is actually really good therapy. And this daughter will this mom's daughter will go to this horse farm, and she'll take care of the horses, she'll shovel manure, she'll do all kinds of jobs for this person who owns the horse farm. Now, will she do anything for you at home? No. That's the way strong-willed kids are. Our son was phenomenal for neighbors and adults, and he worked a job at the Ashburn ice rink from the time he was 14, reffing hockey games. He'd do everything for everybody else, just not much at home. So this daughter is out there in a horse barn, and the daughter's done her chores there. Now she gets to ride a horse. Well, she's trying to get her riding boots on. But like many of your kids, she's very, very particular about how things fit, how they feel. That's why your kids will wear the same clothes every day, same hoodie sweatshirt for 18 straight days, because once they find something comfortable, they're not going to mess with it. So on this day, her socks and the boots don't feel right. So she's wrestling with her boots and she's starting to get flustered. And so mom says, "Oh, honey, just put your boots on. We need to go." Pressuring doesn't help. Well, now the daughter throws her boots down on the ground, like many of your kids do. And the mom, like many of us would react, says, "Young lady, you will not throw your boots like that. I paid a lot of money for those boots. If you throw them again, you're not going to ride horses for the next month." Well, those consequences tend to escalate. This daughter's already frustrated. Now, watch what happens in this situation. The daughter's already frustrated. Her mother's watching her be frustrated. The mother talks, and then the mother threatens a consequence. And now the daughter starts to realize, you know what? If I'm going to lose this one thing that I love, riding horses, for the next month, I may as well go into full meltdown mode. And that's kind of when we talk about a nuclear meltdown, is now it's, I don't want to use the bad language, but inside the child says, um, I'll just say it this way, forget it, right? So forget it. If I'm going to lose everything, I may as well draw you into it, parent, mom and dad, because then at least I'm not going to be the only one melting down. So in this particular situation, the daughter may end up saying, I don't care. Your boots are stupid anyway, and so are you. And you've heard that before with your kids. And I know it's hard because you would have never dreamed of saying that to your parents. And so as soon as the daughter goes with, you're stupid and so are your boots, well, then the mom usually will react. And what happens? We just escalate. And now a mom and daughter in public are screaming at each other. You're both embarrassed. So in that situation, here's where space works really well. You look over and your daughter's getting frustrated. I know that triggers you because inside you're like, I pay a lot of money. I give you all these different things I never had as a kid. It's not that hard to put your boots on. Just please, just do what I told you to do. I get how frustrating it is. But when you react out of your own frustration, you then escalate the situation. I don't do blame or guilt, but I want us to be responsible. We're the adults here. And if we can't control ourselves, we can't expect little humans to control themselves. So, what if in this situation, mom catches herself? And look, it's okay occasionally to make something up in the moment. And mom says, oh, honey, I'm getting a phone call. I'm going to step outside and take that call. And now I go and I give 2 minutes for my daughter, or 4 minutes or 5 minutes for my daughter to wrestle with her boots alone, to wrestle with her emotions alone without me standing over her, watching her. Most of the time, when mom walks back into that horse barn, what will she find? Her daughter has her boots on. And their daughter will act like nothing ever happened. I know that's how your kids are. And you're like, wait, you just called me names? You were upset. You said the riding boots were stupid, and now you want to act like nothing happened? Of course, because it's embarrassing. She knew what she did was wrong, and she rectified it. She corrected it by changing her attitude while you were out of the barn and putting her boots on. And she will go now and have a wonderful time riding her horse. On the way home, she won't bring that up. Eventually, she may say, if you give her space and if you continue to act with humility, your daughter, if you make it easy enough for her, she will say, hey, mom, I'm sorry I yelled at you in that barn. Now, if you demand an apology, she won't apologize. If you go on and on and on and on about it, she won't apologize. But if you begin to create this trusting relationship, and you would even say, hey, honey, back in the barn, I'm sorry. I started to yell at you. I actually got really frustrated, and so I apologize for that. See, that's being a leader. The leader is the one who comes and apologizes and acts like a grown-up first. And if you do that, you will probably create space, emotional space, for your daughter to say, Mom, I shouldn't have done that either. And see, look, when we get to this kind of calm place, rather than having a lecture, you know what, honey? Watch the snotty tone, right? Watch this kind of like, you know what? Well, I pay a lot of money for these things. And if you're going to have that kind of attitude, see, if you talk to me like that, I'm going to have a worse attitude next time. So I talk to kids like they're adults. Hey, honey, on the way home, let's break this down. Here's what happened. You started getting frustrated, and then I got frustrated, and you picked up on my frustration. How does that make you feel? And see, I'm not saying it like, well, how does that make you? I'm talking to her like an adult. I'm just saying, look, we react to each other. This is the dynamic. How did that work? Hey, when I stepped out of the barn, how did that make you feel? And so now your daughter's getting words and she's being able to say, well, that took the pressure off me, Mom. When you stepped out, then I could focus on getting my boots on and I could be frustrated without you being upset at me. See, that's a really cool thing. So now you can give your daughter a code word. And that's one of our favorite things to do is give kids a code word. And the code word could be space. From now on, instead of the daughter saying, I hate you, leave me alone, which is disrespectful, the daughter can say, space, Mom, space. I just need some space. And when your kids are teenagers, giving a little bit of space, because a teenager, their life is so intense. Everything is in the moment, especially with social media. It's all about what's happening right now. And my friends are texting and they're Snapchatting, and I miss the conversation. I feel left out. You can feel that anxiety in them. And so a teenager being able to say, I just need some space. And then you can honor that and respect that instead of them blowing up at you. See, if you can hear it the right way, a lot of times when they're yelling at you, if they were mature enough, they could say, Mom, Dad, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm frustrated right now. Something happened at school. I just need a little space to process that. Will you give that to me? See, if they could say it like that, you would honor it. But they don't always, they're not mature enough because most of us as adults are not mature enough to do that either. So watch what we're doing in here with that example. You know, the ride home after the horse barn situation, or it could be later that night or another day when things are calmed down. That's called discipline. Discipline means to teach. It doesn't mean to punish or take away things because consequences in life don't really change behavior that much. We all know that eating certain foods and not exercising and smoking and drinking too much all lead to very dire physical consequences, even death. And yet we still do it, all those things all the time. Why? Because it's not really a behavior issue. There's usually an emotional need underneath. We're covering up pain, so we drink, or we're covering up pain or sadness, so we eat out of that. So it's not an excuse for behavior. It's just how humans work, that consequences, a threat of an outward consequence, just tends not to work very well. When you get to the root of it, well, yeah, that tends to work a whole lot better. So let me do another example for you. And I'm just going to repeat these things. So I want to control myself first, tone and body posture. Let's give the child something they're in control of in that moment. Observe your kids. Know what they respond well to. We did the fixing the broom. Sofa. We used a code word. So one of our favorite code words is this, and I'll give you one more strategy is, this is called motion changes emotion. So motion or movement is a tool that we use to calm a child down. Now we've gone through this in, hey, could you go to the basement and fix my broom? There's some movement. In our home, one of our favorite ones, it's a favorite story. If you ever listen to our podcast, it's called the Calm Parenting Podcast. Actually, just did a two-part series on calming kids with big emotions. It's free. So there's like 400 episodes on all kinds of neurodivergent kids stuff. So one story you'll hear me tell on there is with our son when he was a tween, in those tween teen years, and he would come at me with attitude. You know what that attitude is. Look, you have every right to react. Young man, you can't talk to me like that. And one time, our strong-willed son said, I just did, because he was a really difficult kid. You know what's kind of fun is I'm talking, I'm watching the ASL, the sign language interpreter, and I can see her doing all of the all that facial expressions. And actually, I'm getting more out of watching you. You're awesome. So thank you for what you're doing. Uh, I can't see your name on there, but I appreciate your work. But your facial expressions with the teenager are just awesome. So he would come at me with that tone. So you have every right to react to that. But one time I remember, troll myself, I stepped backwards and I said, Casey, I've noticed a pattern here. Every time you use that tone of voice with me, it's usually because you're anxious, you're frustrated, or you're hungry, because those are his three triggers. Our son is 31 now. Those are still his three triggers. We live, he lives close by. We live way out west now. We hike a lot in the mountains, and we talk about this all the time. And so we remember back to these days when he was watching me change, because I used to just be super reactive. And so I looked at him and I said, hey, I know what's going on. It's one of these three things. You have two options now. You may continue to talk to me like that, but it never works out well for you. You end up losing things. I know that's not what you want to do. So, second option is, why don't you grab some chips? I'll grab some salsa. I'll meet you out on the deck, where it's cold there now in Virginia. So it could be, I'll meet you in the basement. I'll meet you at the kitchen table. We'll stand around the kitchen counter. Why don't we eat some chips and salsa, and I'll help you with whatever you're struggling with? So the idea was, when he had bad attitude, I didn't look at him and say, hey, you better have a better attitude. Stop talking to me like that. I didn't take it personally. Why? Because I'm a grown adult. This is how teens and tweens talk at times. They get frustrated and they're not mature enough. And by the way, most of us as adults are not mature enough to even say to our spouse, hey, honey, I had a really bad day and I'm really struggling. So forgive me if my tone is a little bit short with you. We don't even know to do that. So I'm not expecting a little kid to do that. So motion changes emotion. Hey, Casey, remember the even matter-of-fact tone. I hear that in your tone. It's not going to work well. So here's another option for you. See, I like that. And that involved movement. You go grab the chips. I'll go grab the salsa. We'll meet in a different place. You could do popcorn. Hey, here's our code word, popcorn. I go and I take 2 minutes to pop some popcorn, and that gives me 2 minutes as the parent to calm down and not be seething all the time, and we're doing something together. It doesn't have to revolve around food. Let me give you a few other options. Oh, by the way, one of the things that I like about this is I'm inviting the child to be with me, instead of, you know what, go to your room until you can learn to be respectful. There's nothing wrong with sending your child to their room. But in the end, over time, I don't want to send an upset child away from me, because then what I'm communicating is, I can't handle this. You go away with me, away from me. Instead, what I'm saying is, oh, I've seen this. I've lived life. I know frustration happens. Now, you're not going to talk to me like that, right? So that tone is, I'm not going to, look, you don't get away with talking to me like that, but I'm giving you an option. I'm helping you save face here. Go grab the chips, and I'm meeting you in a different place. So let me give you some other examples with this of, so there, we do an example sometimes of when our son was really upset, being disrespectful and yelling at my wife in the kitchen. I have every right to come in and say, you can't talk to your mother like that. Why do you do? It just escalates. So I'd walk in and I'd use this phrase, when you're ready, and I'll explain it afterwards. So here are a few options. I'd walk into the room. Casey's face would be all red and he'd be yelling at my wife. And instead of addressing that right away, my first impulse was, I have to put out the emotional fire, right? We do this analogy of like a firefighter coming into a home and then just start yelling at whoever was at home, like, why did you catch your house on fire? Well, you don't start yelling at people. You put the fire out, then you figured out why it happened. So I want to put out the emotional fire. So I would come into that room and say, hey, Case, I'm going to go outside, and I'd be holding up a football or a ball because I like nonverbals in that moment. When you're ready, if you want to come outside, we'll play catch. I'll help you with whatever you're struggling with. Another example. Hey, Casey, listen, I'm going to go in the living room and dump the Legos out. When you're ready, if you want to come in, I'll finish that spaceship with you. See, those things are, I'm inviting the child to be with me. Now, the reason I say when you're ready is this. If with a strong-willed child, you ever demand something of them, especially your kids with PDA, you know you can't do this, right? If I come in and demand, you need to apologize right now, young man, you will always 100% of the time get resistance. So I don't walk in and demand things from them. These kids are in an upset state. These are kids who value their agency, their independence. So instead of, you need to calm down right now, when I walked into the room, I said, hey, I'm going to go do this. So I'm not telling them what to do. I'm telling them what I'm going to do. I'm going outside with a ball. I'm going to dump Legos out. I had a dad once, his daughter liked to draw. And so he came into a room with 2 sketch pads and said, hey, honey, I'm going to go to the basement. When you're ready, if you want to bring some snacks down, we could sit and draw together. See, I'm telling her I'm going to the basement. When you're ready, gives them some agency. Because if you say, you need to stop right now or go do this right now, they'll always resist and fight you. When I said, when you're ready, see if this makes sense. It's like it almost releases them to do what they know they should do because I wasn't demanding it and I wasn't standing over them. Picture this, if I stand there, young man, you're going to come outside with me right now. You're going to get a standoff. You can give any consequence. They will dig their heels in. But I led them. I led the child to a calm place. I went and I controlled myself. Now I'm on the living room floor and I am building with Lego blocks. I'm not looking at the child. I'm inviting them to come be with me, and I'm not standing there with my arms folded, waiting for them to make a decision. I like that one, ASL lady. That was a good one. Do that one again with the arms folded. That was good. You added a little bit of this. So So I'll give you one more that's really cool is coloring, right? You could be with a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old daughter who's just all filled with drama. But if I sit down at the kitchen table and I just start drawing on a piece of paper or coloring, it's very calming. I'm inviting that child to do something with me. So let me do a couple other examples and then we'll get to the Q&A part of this. Now, sometimes you can't go outside. You're a busy parent and you're cooking dinner and you've got 3 or 4 kids. You can't just go outside or sit on the floor with them. What you could say is, oh man, I can tell you're frustrated. Listen, could you help me out? Could you go to the pantry and grab that spaghetti sauce? Do you think you could get that top off for me? Say I gave them a job to do, something a little bit difficult, a challenge. I didn't try to get them to calm down. I gave them a job to do, something within their control. Now, let's say you have kids who are more physical, kids who are very sensory kids, and even kids who get more aggressive. I know people always say, well, let them hit a pillow. What I want you to know is I'm a very intense person. Our son is a very intense person. Hitting a pillow is not satisfying. In fact, we're on vacation, so forgive me for the backdrop and we're about to go hiking. So I'm not dressed up nicely. And I'm in this weird extra bedroom. There's a pillow here. Punching a pillow is not very satisfying. When I get really upset, I want something really physical to happen. And so here are a couple things, ideas for your kids who are very sensory. In a proactive way, I would, if you can, sign your kids up for martial arts classes, rock climbing, wrestling, as much as you can, get them outside, pushing things, pulling things. Build a little obstacle course in your basement or tiny Northern Virginia backyard. I know we don't have a lot of space there. Things kids have to crawl under, crawl over. I actually like waking kids up sometimes saying, hey, I hid your breakfast outside in your obstacle course. Bet you can't find it. Many of our kids love foraging for their food in the morning, and they'll eat outside because they like being by themselves, but that's a different issue. So meet those sensory needs. Here's one that's for a little bit more intense child. I was talking to this mom. We were actually texting, and she said, our daughter is being really aggressive. She has completely lost it, and coloring's not going to work. Building with Legos is not going to work. And I said, hey, do you have a basement? She said, yeah. And I said, is there some furniture down there? And the mom texted back, yeah, there's a sofa. And I said, okay, do this. So what I wanted the mom to do is to say, oh, honey, I just forgot. I need to email grandma about something. Hey, I don't know if you're strong enough, but there's a sofa in the basement. Do you think you could move that from to the other side of the room? Because I really needed to clean down there. Mom walked out of the room. She had given her daughter a challenge. She waited a few minutes. She heard her daughter go downstairs to the basement and could hear the motion. When she went down to the basement, her daughter was there, and her daughter, who 3 minutes before was yelling and screaming and out of control, was standing there beaming with a smile on her face. Mom, is this where you wanted the sofa? And what I want you to see, even if this doesn't work for you, the principles I want you to see are this. This girl, a few minutes before, was screaming out of control, nothing in her control. And in that moment, these kids often feel helpless. They don't know how to calm down. They don't all, your kids with anxiety, they don't know why they're freaking out. And it makes them feel bad about themselves because their brother or sister and their friends go to martial arts class, but I can't even go to a simple class. Why am I so stupid or weird or bad? And so now this daughter was given a challenge. She's physical. She's good at doing adult things. She moved the sofa. I guarantee in some situations she would find the vacuum cleaner and say, Mom, can I clean the room? Because they like doing adult type things. And so she felt proud of herself because now, hey, I can't always control myself, but I can move that heavy sofa. I would just encourage you with this. I have one more example, but I'd encourage you with this. Think about this weekend. Different options. Come up with a list of 5 or 10 jobs or missions that your kids could do when they're upset. It's almost like practicing a fire drill in your home. So in the moment, you're like, I don't know what to do. Have those go-to plans, fixing that broom, moving that sofa, playing with things, moving things, shoveling mulch or in the backyard, whatever it is. So here's the one I'll leave you with, an idea, and we'll still have plenty of time to do Q&A, is the idea of intensity. It will sound very counterintuitive to you. And if you do listen to our podcast, I go through these things all the time because on the podcast, they're about 20, 22, 25 minutes long, and it gives me enough time to develop an idea to give you something to work on. But I go through counterintuitive ideas with these strong-willed kids. And here's one. Intensity is very important. So it's important for a couple of reasons. Many of you have kids who were adopted, maybe were in foster care, or who have struggled with some kind of trauma. Well, what happens is kids begin to associate an intense reaction with connection. See, if you're married, the worst thing in your marriage isn't if you're arguing with your spouse, it's apathy. It's when you no longer care enough about your spouse to even argue with them. And so, kids who have been maybe had some trauma, what they know is, well, if I misbehave and my dad puts down his phone and stops watching TV and comes into the room to yell at me, at least my dad cared enough about me to yell at me. And so they associate that intensity with connection. Unfortunately, what our kids discover is the quickest way to get an adult to react, whether that's a teacher at school or a parent, is to do something wrong. Because when our kids are doing things right or well, we just leave them alone. But as soon as they misbehave, then we come in. What were you thinking? How many times do I have to tell you? Can you see the intensity that comes with that? Well, that feeds the brain because their brains crave intensity. So, what I always want to try to do with these kids is give them positive intensity because they're looking for intense emotional engagement. So, let me give you an example. A child comes home and all day long at school, he or she has been thinking about building a paper airplane because they like building with things, they're good at tinkering with things. And partially it's because many of our kids know, look, I'm not always great at doing school, sitting still, doing homework. My behavior isn't always great because I'm impulsive and I'm a leader and I've got initiative and I get in trouble sometimes for that. And I don't always have a lot of friends, but I'm really good at building. I like building. So child comes home from school, makes a paper airplane and flies it. It doesn't fly the way he or she expected it to. So the strong-willed child is going to pick up that airplane and crumple it up. Stupid airplane. And sometimes they'll even internalize, I'm stupid. And they'll start throwing the airplane. Well, every good mom and dad will come in the room now and say, oh, honey, that was a really good airplane. Well, wrong answer, because see, that's that sweet tone that sounds condescending. Oh, honey, that was a really good airplane. And what it sounds like is, please don't be upset. I'm really uncomfortable when you're upset. When you get upset, you tend to escalate. See, that creates instability when I do that. So instead, what I want to do is come into the room and say, oh, you know what? Notice the tone here. You know what? If I were you, I'd be frustrated too. You put a lot of time into building that airplane and you expected it to fly a certain way and it didn't. That's frustrating. See, that kind of intense validation says, oh, you get it, Dad. You understood me, because when we say, oh, it's no big deal, we'll build another one. No, you don't understand that I put a lot of time and energy and thought into that, and I'm upset about it. And you're dismissing it. But when I come and say, yeah, that's frustrating, see, that's immediately calming. Oh, my mom or dad gets it. Then what I say is, you know what? I need to go get a drink. I'm going to go to the bathroom. When I get, in fact, do you want a drink? When I get back, we'll problem solve. So watch, remember we talked about giving space. I remove myself from that room where the child is crumpling up his airplane and throwing it down and is upset, because no one likes to be watched when they're in that mode. And so I go to the bathroom, I go grab a drink. It gives the child space to process his or her emotions without me watching. And when I get back in, I can say, okay, so what's our plan here? What are we going to do differently? And see the tone? I'm problem solving. I'm doing it like you do at the office. Practice today. I'll leave you with this thought. This afternoon and evening, treat your kids like you treat your colleagues at the office. Because at the office, you don't scream at people and you probably don't use that irritating, condescending tone. You say, like, yeah, it's frustrating because I understand our boss gave us this project to do and we just do it. But then our boss, she just changed or he just changed the parameters of the project. Yeah, it's frustrating. So why don't we go for, look, we do this in the work. Why don't we go for a walk? Why don't we go to the lunchroom? Why don't, and then we'll problem solve. How are we going to fix this? That's how we deal with it in the corporate world in our jobs. So do that in your home. Okay. I've talked a lot. I'm still going to talk because I'm going to go through the Q&A. But let me see if I can go through in the 18 minutes left. I'm going to just run through very quickly a lot of the different questions that people had submitted here. Um, okay. Um, our kids rage, scream, and punches things. Um, again, the punching part really scares me. That's where I want to do with that child a lot of proactive, very intense kind of work. Let's come up with some intense jobs, a mission for that child to do when they're getting upset, and actually proactively. I know this is hard, moms and dads, but as much as you can, a lot of physical exercise is really healthy for these kids. We have, look, we have a 31-year-old son who's married. He works with us here in this business. If you ever email us at Celebrate Calm, you'll probably talk to our son, Casey. He's an intense kid. He will still at times, we live out west in the mountains, and he will say, Dad, I've got to go climb up the mountain. Otherwise, I'm just going to be a jerk the rest of the day. And I'm the same way. So that really physical work, shoveling mulch, even having, if it's a son, having a dad leave him a note. I love these. I used to leave notes for my son when I would go to work. Before I did this, I worked at AOL out in Northern Virginia. And so I would leave notes for Casey and say, a mission. Hey, I forgot to move those 3 bags of mulch to the under the tree on the other side of the yard. Do you think you're strong enough to do that? And that challenge was really good. So I've kind of addressed that one before. How do we talk to children afterwards about what happened, and importantly, why it happened? I kind of went through that in the horse barn example. I would say give it time and space. When you do it very, keep it short. Don't go on and on. Just break it down and ask questions, but don't talk to them in a condescending way. And don't create like a big family meeting over it. I would do it one-on-one while you're going for a walk with your dog. If I have a teenager, what I used to do with Casey is say, hey, Casey, I'm going to run get a smoothie or a couple tacos. You want to come ride with me? Riding in the car and talking, because there's not all that eye contact, is really helpful. And I'd bring it up like this. Hey, Case, earlier today or yesterday, remember we had that situation where you were yelling at mom, and I'm curious what was going on. So that phrase, I'm curious, is a lot different than, hey, you need to explain yourself. Why did you yell at mom? Instead, I'm being curious and I'm saying, hey, I get it that it happens. And there will be a consequence for it. You can't let your kids get away with things. Consequences don't really change behavior, but you have to do it to set boundaries. But we'd be walking or in the car and I'd say, hey, let me know what was going on. I'm curious because I already know you can't yell at mom and get away with it. You know it's wrong. So something was happening. And so I was being curious, and the I'm curious tone is I want to problem solve so I can help you. So you don't keep doing things that hurt you. See, this is kind of like for us, this is a core discipline tool, and discipline means to teach. It doesn't mean, we need to talk about your behavior. That puts them on the defensive and you're going to lose all your stuff. It's, hey, I want to help you so you don't keep doing things that cause you to lose your screens all the time. So I'm just problem solving with you like I problem solve with someone at my work. And that's how I talk to them about it. Like, you don't have to do this, but in some cases, I would ask your kids and say, okay, so I know you know that's wrong. What do you think would be an appropriate consequence for that? Now, the one we use when he would yell at my wife, it's not like taking screens away really matched up with that. And so I would say, what do you think the consequence? Well, Dad, I know I need to go and apologize to mom. Well, that's a good one. Well, then I would want it to go a step further and say, well, why don't we do some act of service for your mom? And sometimes I would actually do it with him. Was that letting him off the hook? No, we were just bonding over it. I was like, yeah, you messed up. Why don't we do something extra nice for mom? Because she does so much for us around here. And so I like using intense situations to actually bond with my child and to actually teach and show them a different way. Question, how do you convince the child that deep breathing or using the Calm app actually do work? One is that I don't try to convince my kids of anything. As soon as you try to, we just did an election. How many of you convinced someone to vote for the opposite person? You didn't. You can't. It's really hard to convince people to do something they don't want to do. So I don't try to convince. I tend to lead them. I show them. And I kind of went through that. Look, the breathing exercises can be really helpful, but here's the hard part with our strong-willed, intense kids. To do a breathing exercise implies that you have some measure of self-control or impulse control or self-awareness in that moment, and you usually don't. Deep breathing works for non-intense people usually. I don't, that's why I did the punching the pillow thing. I need something more concrete. I need something more physical than just sitting. If I sit and try to breathe, let's count down from 10, 10, 9, 8, I want to hurt someone, right? Like I'm intense. So I kind of answered that already. Um, um, how would these differ for an autistic child with PDA? That's where I do a lot more leading, a lot less talking. I use that phrase, when you're ready, and I sit. I do so much leading with these kids. So they watch me calming down and I'm leading them around. How do we respond when our first grader tries to contradict everything we say? Sometimes he'll even argue about the weather with us. Okay, so I'm going to be kind of jerky and mean to you. In a fun way. And I do encourage you, listen to the podcast because we go through this stuff all the time and I will challenge you. I don't do blame or guilt, but oftentimes this is a child looking for that brain stimulation. Because look, it's no fun to walk down in the morning and agree with everything that my mommy or daddy is saying. But so think about this. What's happening in many of your kids' brains is they don't get enough dopamine to their brain. They don't get enough, their brains are physiologically understimulated. So if I poke my brother or almost poke my brother and push their button and my brother reacts, Kirk, leave me alone. What happens? Mom usually comes in the room. Kirk, leave your brother alone. Dad comes in the room. Stop it because now my wife is upset and I don't know how to handle my wife upset. So one kid, by looking at his brother, got 3 people upset. That stimulates my brain. So arguing with you about the weather, guess what? I cannot believe that you would say that it is raining out. There is not a drop of rain. Some of you, where I'm tough with you, is that's your issue. Why are you arguing with a child, right? Well, they always want to get the last word in. Well, it's only an issue because you want to get the last word in. You need to learn how to control yourself and stop feeding that. I just don't argue. I don't go in the courtroom. So when Casey was about 11 or 12, I remember he would come into the room with his eyes like all aflame. And I knew, I finally figured out, he didn't want to argue with me. He was looking for my intense emotional engagement. And so I finally apologized and I said, Casey, I need to apologize to you. For like the first 10 or 11 years of your life, what I've trained you to do is every time you argue with me, give me some attitude, roll your eyes, I react. And what I've done is I've taught your brain to seek my intense emotional engagement by doing negative things. So I apologize for that. From now on, I'm not going in the courtroom. I'm not going to argue with you, but I will give you intense emotional engagement. Hey, if you want to come to the garage, I got a new tool. If you want to come help me build something, oh, we could do that together. I've got a project that I'm working on outside. He liked outdoor stuff. You want to do that with me? You want to go for a hike? Oh, you'll get all my intensity during that time. If he would play guitar, if you want to go downstairs and we could play guitar and I'll listen to you and we'll do that. I'll give you my intensity that way. So give your child intensity in positive ways. How do we minimize the negative influence of the more challenging sibling on younger siblings? That's hard, obviously. I think part of what we're doing in the family, the structure of the family, is we're teaching everyone a basic principle, which is the only person in life that you can control is yourself. So that negative influence of the other child will begin to dissipate a lot when you learn how to control yourself and give that child tools in order to be successful. I would go back in early August. I did 2 podcasts on when consequences don't work and on when kids don't want to listen to you. And it's about creating successes. And what I want the kids noticing is this: if I had to frame if I could go back and do family life again, knowing what I know now, I would frame everything with this. Hey, everyone in this family has strengths and weaknesses. We have pluses and minuses. Every one of us. None of us is better than the other one. We just all have different strengths and different weaknesses. And so the strong-willed child, you're just going to see more of those in the home sometimes. And what I'm trying to do is say, yeah, so your brother struggles with X and Y, so I'm going to give him tools to succeed to help with that. Now, other sibling who's, say, the compliant child, well, that child will often have trouble being more compliant and getting walked on because they're often people pleasers. I just talk to kids and my family like you would at work in a normal situation of like, yeah, look, your brother, yeah, he gets in trouble more. Why? Because he's more impulsive, because he's got a lot of initiative and energy, and he sees something, he just wants to do it, and he doesn't know, and he touches the hot stove. That's the way your brother is made. He is a stove toucher. He has a higher risk tolerance. And then I look at people out in the real world and I think entrepreneurs, people who start their own businesses, often have these ideas. They're go-getters. They're not afraid to fail. They're going to jump. They're very independent. They don't want to be told what to do. Well, what happens is their path is going to be a little bit harder. And so then you have people who tend to be rule followers. Well, they're awesome to have in corporations. They're great middle managers because they're good at processors. And so you can teach your kids and say, well, why does my brother, why does he get away with that? Or why does he have to do that? Because he's made differently than you. And one day, all of those really, those traits that cause him to get in trouble a lot are going to serve him really well in the adult world. And he's probably going to own his own business. Now, he's probably going to fail at 2 or 3 businesses first, but he'll get back up because he likes the challenge. Well, you're not going to go down that path because you're more of a process person. So you're teaching your kids the way their brains are made. You're teaching about their personalities, and that neither of them are better or worse. They're just different. And so, well, why do you treat that my strong-willed child differently? Well, because he's made differently. Well, that's not fair. Well, here's what else isn't fair. More compliant child. Your life is very easy. You get along with people because you just do what they say. You do your homework in an hour. It takes your brother with ADHD or dyslexia. That's a tough one. If you have kids with dyslexia, they're going to be really frustrated kids. They're not primarily, most of your kids are not primarily defiant children. They're frustrated children. And what they're looking for, they need tools to succeed. And so I can look at the other compliant child and say, look, you sail through life. It's easy for you to make friends with kids your own age. Have you ever noticed that your brother, it takes him twice as long to do homework, that he gets anxious about going to that new Taekwondo class, that he struggles to connect with other kids his own age? But you've noticed your brother will go down the street and talk to Mr. Johnson, the 60-year-old man, about fixing things. You guys are just different. And so I treat you differently because you're made differently and you need different tools. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. So much of this is about understanding your kids. Let me do a couple more. Building trust after a meltdown response goes wrong. This is really good. So I'm interpreting this as your response to the meltdown goes wrong, building trust. Simple honesty. When things settle down, coming back and saying, hey, son, daughter, what happened earlier was you got frustrated. This happened. I had a bad day and I took that out on you. I yelled at you. I lectured you too much, and I apologize for that. Apologize. Now, if you have been in a situation where you have overreacted them a lot of times now, don't keep apologizing and don't keep saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try better. Don't try better. Do it differently. And let you changing yourself be your lecture. It was, if you talk to our son now, he will tell you one of the things that he most remembers from his childhood is not all my apologies, not all the stuff. He said what he remembers is, I saw you wrestling with your inner demons to actually change. I saw you wrestling inside. I'd see that look on your face, and you'd start with that tone because that's what you learned from your dad, because he remembers his grandpa was a very angry man. And he said, but then I saw you change it, and I saw you reset yourself. And he said, that was the greatest lecture you ever gave me. I watched you going from a reactive, angry dad to being a dad that I could talk to and come to. That's how you rebuild the trust. So I just encourage you to do that. Look, we're running up on time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the comments. I obviously didn't get to all of them. I do encourage you. Our podcast is free. We have 400 episodes. You can see different ones for different age groups. We have a podcast directory for school issues. Listen to that. I think you'll find it really helpful. If you struggle after listening, you can email us. I think on the slide that we have a special code. If you go to celebratecalm.com, FCPS, you get a big discount if you're ever interested in our programs, because we know how hard it is to live in Northern Virginia. Anyway, thank you to the Parent Resource Center. Thank you to our people who are translating into different languages, and my ASL friend who had the best facial expressions ever today and kept up with my fast talking. So thank you all. Love you all. If we can help you in any way, hang in there. You're good parents. Your kids are going to be okay. So I will stop right there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Martin. This was amazing. I have a lot of notes, and I know you all probably do too. And so what we are going to do is send the recording out next week, and I will also put in the discount from to get 25% off in that email that I sent out to you all as well. So I know he wasn't able to get to all the questions, but you never have another opportunity to engage with him in the podcast and with this discount. So we appreciate you on this Friday, and we hope you all have a great weekend. Look out for our email.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.